Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Firestone wash processed Panama from Goût. There's the bag right there. And Goût, based out of Chengdu, China. And this is their fourth ever appearance on this channel, having recently reviewed the La Papaya, a wash processed Ecuadorian coffee. And of the four coffees that we are reviewing from Goût, this is by far my biggest indulgence, as the Firestone coffees were extremely difficult to find last year. So I was very excited to see Goût carrying them, as the limited experiences I did have with Firestone were pretty positive. So I'm definitely looking forward to discussing this one, as this right here is day 51. And recipe we went with for this coffee was our standard recipe at a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which indicates a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this coffee does continue to remain in line with our previous experiences with this coffee roaster, which we've described as being on the very light side of things, one of the lighter roasted Asian coffee roasters that we've reviewed on this channel. All of that to say, this is a very light coffee by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 23, first impression, and we did opt for the V60, and it was a very nice start, though a bit direct for Firestone. And what I mean by that is that the limited experiences we did have with Firestone last year did offer some really nice depth to them, where this one right here was a bit more vintage Panamanian geisha, offering a very clean tea-like base with an abundance of florals and fruit sweetness as well, expectedly citric and stone fruit dominant with some very nice clarity nonetheless. So of the four Goût coffees, this one definitely had the best first impression. It was to the point where a lot of those coffees definitely felt like they needed more time. This coffee was really good right from the onset, so even then I felt like this coffee was just going to improve from this point going forward. Day 26 through the Chemex, and it does continue to present a classic Panamanian geisha-like profile with a clean, floral, and citric forward base. There's a bit more of the stone fruits present this time as well, though in a slightly more subtle sense this time around. A slight bit of citric grain showing great potential to this coffee, but otherwise just another solid day as of this moment. And oftentimes I can have mixed experiences with Chemex coffees for the Panamanian geishas, as it already has such great clarity that it doesn't necessarily need that added level of clarity to them, and at times they can strip away some of the intensity of those coffees. Day 29 through the April brewer, and it's a very nice day yet again, with continued focus on the classic geisha profile. The best of the coffee does come after a lengthy cool down, which is very much expected, as there's some subtle graining qualities, mostly with a citric and floral forward base. Nice depth, as there's plenty of sugary stone fruit sweet qualities present on this one yet again. We move on to day 32 as we opted for the V60 with some higher temperatures and a more fine grind, and this is the best the coffee had been to this point, as it feels much better in terms of the flavor separation to the cup, especially with the listed white peach being the most defined it had been to this point, especially within the intermediary area of this coffee. Otherwise, it's offering plenty of tea-like aspects, mostly in terms of the base, as well as a citric florality. Day 35 through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and the cup is the best it's been to this point with the most amount of the listed white peach, and I do attribute that more to the amount of time that we've allowed this coffee as opposed to the actual brew method itself. A better fruit forward base than some of the other experiences we've had, I should say a better fruit forward aspect, as it's offering better clarity and definition to the floral aspect as well, greater intensity, so this was a very enjoyable day given that we were just getting much more out of this coffee. Day 38 through the V60 with our standard recipe, and the coffee just does continue to improve every single time we brew it, as there's tremendous florality this time, very much in line with the listed jasmine. So that's what I was experiencing from this coffee every single time I brewed it, was a lot of the notes in this one just became better defined, better articulated, much cleaner, much more precise, and that was very much the case on this day 38 mark with the floral aspects to it, a slight herbality and a savory herbal tea component, but additionally a slight candied sweetness and a honeysuckle-like sense with subtle traces of stone fruit, as this one was ever changing, and that's much more what I was expecting from this coffee given the very limited experiences I'd had last year, as those coffees just continue to change. You take a sip, you'd experience so many different things, and that's starting to replicate itself within this experience. Day 41 through the Chemex with our standard recipe, and it was not quite as good as some of the previous days, as it's mostly skewing a bit more in the tea-like side of things with an herbal focus and a little less definition on the florals. So it was still good, but as I mentioned with the Chemex, at times it can strip away some of the intensity and some of the additional fruit factors within it. So on day 44, we opted for the Chemex, with the V60, and the coffee is the best it had been to this point, offering a cleaner and better defined, almost marshmallow-like sweetness right off brew, followed by a well-defined sugary stone fruit sweetness in line with the listed white peach, cooling down and finishing into a citric bergamot-like sense. Tea-like aspect is also present with a slight herbality, so a lot of things to pick up within this coffee. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have 2 level 5s, so let's go through those real quick, and we'll start with the cleanliness level 5. So as I mentioned, the reason why Panamanian Geishas continue to be my favorite coffee year after year is because of the cleanliness, and if you're scoring level 5 in terms of cleanliness, then I am automatically very happy right from the start. So this one's scoring level 5 mostly because of just how wonderfully defined the coffee is, especially in terms of the florals, which we'll discuss here real shortly. But outside of that, I do have to say that it just has such a clean base that it allows you to really experience a lot of the flavor profiles that are present within this one. So very happy with that scoring at a level 5, and that takes us into the florality, level 5. So I do have that jasmine note listed on here. Yes, it is, I want to say, one of the most defined jasmine notes. There is one coffee that I've reviewed in the past that has maybe a little bit more of a jasmine quality to it. I can't recall which one it is. I know it was a different Panamanian Geisha, but it does go to show that just wonderfully clean base can make for a very enjoyable and well-defined floral aspect to it, as is the case with this coffee. Handful of level 4s. We'll start with the finish, level 4, and I'm very happy with the finish of this coffee, mostly because it is ever-changing. There are times where it has that slight citric grain quality, times it has that slight marshmallow-like sweetness, times it has that lingering stone fruit sweetness to it. There's plenty of florals that are also present within the finish, and I really enjoyed that aspect of Panamanian Geishas because they are, as people say, complex. They just have such great depth to them, and this one was no exception in that regard. Sweetness, level 4, and I'm very happy with the sweetness of this coffee, and I'm kind of curious. I'm going to take a quick look. Yeah, they also have the sweetness listed pretty high in their own tasting wheel, and that's really nice given the experiences I've had with the other Firestone coffees did tend to also be on the sweeter side of things, which certainly helps when the rest of the coffee is just this clean. If it has at least some nice intensity to it, then it does make those we'll say more pronounced, I should say better defined aspects a little bit more enjoyable as well. And then we have a couple of level 4s in terms of the fruit qualities. Citrus fruit, level 4, and they do have that bergamot note listed on here. I can absolutely 100% see that, mostly because it does have a little bit of that slightly more zesty citric quality to it. Additionally, the stone fruit is there at the level 4, and they have that white peach. And once again, that makes a lot of sense given that there's a much more sugary stone fruit quality that is present within this one. So happy with both those being there at that level 3, level 4. We move on to the one level 3, which is the savoriness, and that's something that I mentioned in our previous Goût & Co review, which is that their coffees do continue to be a little bit more tea-like, which has just been so interesting to me because all of the coffees we've had, I would say, were much more tea-like representations of those origins. So the Ethiopia, the Kenya, the Ecuador, especially for a Mejorado, and this one right here, though this one's a little bit more understandable and expected given that it is a Panamanian Geisha. It's just an interesting takeaway I had from these Goût & Co coffees. Final thing worth discussing, body level 2. Fully expected, we are working with a Panamanian Geisha, though it did have a little bit more texture than at times they can have, as oftentimes they're a little bit too tea-like. But this one right here had at least a little bit of body to it, so level 2 is where we opted to score it. But as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. This one was easily my favorite of the Goût & Co coffees that we are reviewing, which was always the expectation going into it. Now, as far as the overall expectations that I did have for this coffee, did it live up to them? I want to say maybe it was really close. I think there were some times, especially on the earlier days, where I had mixed impressions because of just what I know this coffee is capable of. The one we had last year from Apollon's Gold, it was pretty early, and I do have to say that it was just so special and enjoyable to the point where it was one of my favorite coffees of the entire year. This is still extremely nice, but as far as Panamanian Geishas go, I want to say it's maybe in the slightly higher side of the ones that we've reviewed this year. That's not to necessarily say that it is on par with some of the very best that we've reviewed this year, as I do review quite a few Panamanian Geishas over the course of the year. That's to say that I did enjoy this one right from the start, if maybe not entirely to the level I might have expected. I had thoughts that this could end up being one of my favorite coffees of the entire year, and I wouldn't necessarily say it was that good, but it was still a very good coffee. The type of person I would suggest this coffee to, I have to start with a Panamanian geisha coffee drinker, because obviously this has so many of those qualities: the very high level of cleanliness, the very high level of florality, the lower body, and the very nicely defined flavor profiles within this one. Also coupled with some really nice sweetness and some really nice citric fruit qualities to it. Just basically a lot of what you'd expect for a Panamanian geisha, all presented in a lighter profile and with great depth. So I feel like if you've enjoyed those coffees in the past, as I have, that's the main reason I enjoyed this one. That's the type of person I would suggest it to, and it's also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to hear your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of Firestone wash processed Panama from Goût & Co. Thank you for watching.